afternoon, Terence. I hope you're doing great. Thank you for joining us from Singapore. Terence is from TSC AI, and he's going to tell us a bit more about what he does. And he's one of our main sponsors for the Africa Mining Forum, and will be speaking on ESG during the event. We're quite excited to have Terence with us today. Terence, can you please tell me, when it comes to investing in African mining, what has your attention today?
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks very much for having us. I think it's a very interesting point in time that we live in, because obviously the number one factor is COVID-19, and what would be the impact. And we look at that from a number of perspectives. There's the length, the duration, and the depth of the shock. So as we look around the world, we already see 1,600 mines have been temporarily suspended. Now that's a big deal, and one has to wonder what will happen in Africa. If you look at the supply chain shocks, ports, travel, oil shocks, and then also China's global ripple effect. Now, China is a pretty big player in Africa. I think they directly, if my research is correct, control 24 mining operations across Africa, which makes it a very big deal. So the other thing would be the people problem, workforce productivity. It's really difficult to work from home and run a mine.
Yeah.
So what happens to all those skilled technicians? How do they get in? How do they travel? Now, it's a very labor-intensive industry. And it's different in Australia, where I'm from, in Western Australia, in the Pilbara region. You have Rio Tinto, which has been very successful with their mine of the future concept in piloting. There's enormous trucks all the way from Perth, thousands of miles away. But I'm not quite sure that we're there yet in Africa, given just wage cost differentials. So it's going to be extremely interesting.
Thank you, Terence. I think I tend to agree with you. There's still some time to come for Africa, but I think we've seen lately, and I was talking to some of the mining companies in Aussie, and then they were sharing that there have been improvement into dealing with AI and digital and smart mining, when they can now do product demonstration or using drones on the mine. I mean, it's not ideal, but I think it might be the silver lining of COVID, where it accelerated the need to implement some of the automation in the mine. So not sure we're completely ready, but let's go back to COVID. And I know it's been a topic for the last 6 months. I feel this year is gone anyway, but what did it change, do you think, according to you, in the way to do business in Africa, specifically for, I would say, Australian stakeholders?
Well, I think across every sector, across every country, and each individual person, it's changed radically everything. And we're nowhere, unfortunately, near the end of that chapter. I think this is going to be a world-shifting event. In fact, it's interesting when you think about it. This is the first crisis the whole world has experienced at the same time. I mean, not necessarily with the same circumstances. The rich 1% or the 0.01% might have quadrupled their trillions and fortunes. But for the rest of us, and that includes me, unfortunately, it's a far different story. So if we look at Africa, for Australian players, American, or what have you, I think the interesting thing is that we're sailing into very uncharted waters. So we look at a lot of the prevented risk register and metrics that companies used to have didn't work. They didn't apply. They failed. They were caught as flat-footed and surprised as anyone else, despite large teams trying to forecast the future. So in fact, what we increasingly see is that this forward scenario risk planning needs to be based on data. So there's a couple of factors that will come out from this, and we will see that particularly as cash-strapped governments emerge from this disaster of this pandemic. There's going to be a lot more knocking on the door of mining companies and other survivors for increased royalties and taxes. And that's going to have a very big impact. I also think we should be mindful, let's wish that on no one, that where there's misery, there is a breeding ground for tension, for civil strife, for terrorist activities. And we also see that panning out in Africa, in small scale, admittedly, but we do see it has come to light in Mozambique and some of our operations there. where we've literally had our clients pull out of the market because it literally gets too dangerous. So I think there's going to be a lot of impacts, and the future has yet to reveal them.
Thank you, Terence. Yeah, I think it's same storm but different boats we are in, and it will be an interesting way of moving forward. It's interesting to say that people have removed their operation. For me, as a junior level, because they're still at exploration stage, is still hope for investment and still hope for alternative financing for them, because they're not at a stage where they have put all the cards on the table. So I think there's still a nice future for them, and I think they will be the future anyway in Africa, because there's that many big mines. There's that many big groups. There's one Rio Tinto, there's one Ivano, there's one Barrick. So I think there's hope for those business models to adapt quicker than the big ones, and hopefully we will tackle, and you will see during the event, some of the legislation that haven't changed, just for that, just to really accommodate those miners and to give them confidence, which is quite interesting, and mostly in West Africa.
Wonderful.
So, Terence,
I look forward to the event.
Yeah, me too, actually. So going forward, what do you think mining companies to do to build more resilient business model?
Well, I think the number one thing that everyone is concerned about is good cash management currently. But independently of that, let's assume they do their housekeeping properly, and I'm sure they do. So they do have reliable forecasts over the cash. There's a couple of other things that I see very, very important, and that's digitalization. So it's how do we, as you were saying before, move faster towards intelligent mining. Now that means a lot of different things for a lot of people. We talked before about Rio Tinto's mine in the future. Huge trucks, remote piloted, it's wonderful, it's amazing. But those tend to have the headlines. It's the other technologies right across the value chain, the mining value chain, which are very interesting. And I think it's the sum total of all of them that can drive and affect change. So as we look at that, we have automation, digital workforce is another, integrated enterprise and ecosystems. So how do they work better internally? And then the analytics and decision support. And so that's where we come into the picture. Because increasingly post-COVID, what we'll see is a political and social license to operate environment, which is far more challenging. And so as we look at that, we look at how efficient are people at market entry, stakeholder management, tracking the issues, working better with the communities, really driving forward some of their ESG and SDG agenda items. So I think mining companies will have a key role to play in their local communities, particularly communities with poor infrastructure. So we do a lot of work with McKinsey, and what we see, there are basically 10 different reputation drivers. I won't go through all of them, but your commitment to the environment, fair pricing, local community content, strong financial performance, how you treat your employees. All of these have a variety of factors which hang off them. And all of these will be absolutely critical for those mining companies to master. It's a narrative. I'm not there right now to pillage my way through this crisis and ensure that I survive. I'm, as a mining company, part of a much, much larger community. And it's from the CEO down that the clear, constant, and calibrated, if you like, narrative has to flow. So they may be in some difficult situation, but the more transparent and honest they are about that, I think the better that will play out in the end. So we look at not just ESGs, but also SDGs. And SDGs, fundamentally, that's the Sustainable Development Goals. Basically, the UN's belief that by 2030, a number of different variables have to have happened if we are to have a planet, if we are to have good health and low poverty and hunger and all of these good things. But mining companies fundamentally impact those because often they work in more remote, less rich, if you will, communities. So it's going to be key, and I think it's quite exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the latest David Attenborough documentary has also been a wake-up call for many of us.
That was terrible.
That was depressing.
It was very depressing, which is unlike our friend Mr. Attenborough. Normally he does end on a bright, cheery, optimistic hope about blue whales resurgent in the Antarctic, but not this time. It was a
great journey, though, to see in a lifetime how we have changed the environment and what has been our impact. And as you say, the mining industry and then the oil and gas industry is usually responsible for it as well. But as you mentioned, the ESG, we will definitely dive into this during your session. But I think it became more than critical. It became a requirement for mining companies to adapt. Otherwise, some investor won't even look at their portfolio, won't even look at their project if these boxes are not ticked, which is, I think, a fantastic thing to. It's the backbone of the mining industry now. You're going to have to move forward with those policies.
Well, I think so. And what's interesting in the ESGs is that the term or the acronym ESG may be a new one. We may have started way back with CSR and corporate citizenship and other initiatives, but all of these have really been giving, we're on a path towards that journey towards sustainability. Now, I like ESGs a lot more than CSR and other concepts because they really bake in rather than bolt on the concept of a company doing something and doing something important. So we also have some research which is quite interesting, which shows that it was a study out of MIT which showed that companies, mining companies, gold mining companies in Africa actually outperform all of their peer group by a huge percentage the more they are focused on the community, the environment, and ESG factors.
And this is one of the main, any investor that you would talk to, it's about finding the right partner, connecting with the community, and having a dialogue. And I think more than anywhere else in the world, in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's vital to get anything moving. And that's why it's been really hard for some of the mining companies. They said being stuck in Australia or Canada, not having this one-on-one with the government or the communities, which we know unlock everything. But I mean, we will hopefully see some movement in the next few months. Terence, I'm going to pick up on your brain a bit more. When it comes, do you have any tips? I would say the do and don'ts when it comes to investing in Africa for any junior mining or investor that's looking at the region that's still a bit shaky and not convinced. What is your take on it going forward?
Well, I think if I may, I'd offer some amateur tips because Africa is always difficult, but every new region is always difficult. So it is data-driven decision-making, really driving the information assets that a company has before they make that decision and as they make that decision. It's about excellence in stakeholder management, a zero silo approach. But also, and this is perhaps the obvious one, but I'll state it anyway, to the little local community, the junior mining play is a giant company. And so they need to equally guard that narrative. They're focused on SDGs, ESGs, community development, the benefit that they can bring that community very, very clearly in sight because they're regarded as enormous for the little village just next door to them.
It's a matter of perspective, isn't it? Thank you so much, Terence, for that. I appreciate. I will obviously share this with you and then obviously go on TSCAI on the website to check more about what Terence is doing with this fantastic team.